Dr. Velthara had been teaching at the Galactic Xenobiology Institute for over 30 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her 6 hands trembled as she checked her protective suit's seals for the 5th time that morning. The suit was military-grade, designed to withstand the claws of a Regelian death cat or the acidic breath of a Proximan spine crawler. Yet somehow, she felt more nervous about the single human sitting in her classroom than she had about any dangerous creature she'd ever studied. The human's name was Jehoiakim, and he looked completely ordinary by Earth standards, average height, dark hair, wearing what appeared to be simple cloth garments that wouldn't protect him from a mild breeze, let alone the deadly environments his species called home. But Dr. Velthara knew better than to judge by appearances. This creature came from Terra, a planet so hostile that most galactic civilizations classified it as uninhabitable. The fact that an entire species had not only survived there but thrived was both fascinating and terrifying. Around the classroom, her other students were taking every possible precaution. The Ethereans, beings of pure energy who rarely took solid form, had compressed themselves into heavily shielded containment units. Their wispy, glowing forms flickered nervously behind layers of protective barriers. The Vorthans, crystalline beings whose bodies could shatter from emotional stress, had wrapped themselves in shock-absorbing gel pods. Even the Nebulans, who breathed methane and lived in gas-giant atmospheres, were wearing extra filtration systems, but Jiho just sat there in regular clothes, looking relaxed. He had pulled out what appeared to be a simple writing instrument and a piece of paper. Paper, an organic material that could catch fire, tear, or decompose. The aliens used quantum data, crystals that could survive being thrown into a star. The differences were staggering. Dr. Velthara cleared her throat, the sound amplified through her suit's speakers. Class, today marks a historic moment. For the first time in our institute's history, we have a Deathworlder participating in our advanced xenobiology course. She gestured toward Jiho with one of her upper arms. Student Kim comes to us through the New Galactic Cultural Exchange Program, and we are honored to learn alongside a representative of such a resilient species. The word resilient was diplomatic. What she really meant was terrifyingly adapted to survive in conditions that would kill most known life forms. Terra was a nightmare world of extreme temperatures, violent weather, predatory animals, poisonous plants, and unstable geology. The fact that humans had not only survived but developed advanced technology and space travel was considered one of the greatest mysteries in xenobiology. Today's lesson focuses on apex predators from death worlds. Dr. Velthara continued, trying to keep her voice steady. We have assembled specimens from 12 different hostile environments, all safely contained behind our most advanced containment systems. She pressed a control on her desk, and massive transparent barriers began rising round the room, revealing creatures that made most of her students instinctively move backward. There was a centauri acid wasp, its stinger dripping with venom that could dissolve hull plating. A Betelgeuse shadow stalker sat motionless, its body absorbing light so completely that it appeared as a moving void. The crystalline ice predator from Rigel 7 shifted and reformed its blade-like appendages with soft, musical sounds that were actually hunting calls designed to lure prey. But the centerpiece of the collection was the creature from Earth itself. Dr. Velthara had spent considerable resources acquiring it, and even more on the containment system. The Terran Kodiak bear stood nearly 3 meters tall even on all fours, its brown for hiding muscles that could generate enough force to bend steel. Its claws were longer than most beings' entire appendages, and its teeth could crush bone with ease. The alien students stared at the collection in horrified fascination. These were creatures from their worst nightmares, the kind of beings that featured in their species' scary stories told to misbehaving younglings. To see them in person, even safely contained, was overwhelming. That's when Jiho raised his hand. Dr. Velthar noticed that his movement was smooth and confident, without the jerky, nervous energy that most beings displayed when confronted with such dangerous predators. His expression was curious rather than terrified. When he smiled, revealing those flat white teeth that seemed so alien compared to the fangs, mandibles, and energy disruptors that other species used for defense, several students actually flinched. "Professor," Jiho said, his voice carrying clearly through the room without any electronic amplification, another unsettling reminder of human capabilities. "That's a Terran Kodiak bear, right? Ursus Artos Mindorfi. If I'm remembering my taxonomy correctly." The classroom fell silent. Dr. Velthor checked her notes frantically. The human had identified the creature instantly. Without scanning equipment, without consulting databases, just by looking at it. Moreover, he'd used the scientific classification system with perfect pronunciation. Yes, she managed to say, "acquired from your home world's northern regions." It weighs approximately 680 kilograms and possesses sufficient strength to... She trailed off as she realized she was explaining the capabilities of an Earth predator to an actual Earth native. "Nice specimen," Jiho said casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Looks healthy and well-fed. Though I have to say, Professor, I think your containment field might be calibrated wrong." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Velthor's suit sensors began flashing warnings as her stress levels spiked. "What do you mean?" she asked. Though she was afraid to hear the answer, the sound that came from the Kodiak bear was unlike anything the alien students had ever heard in person. It was a deep, thunderous roar that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the classroom. The noise was so powerful that it triggered automatic sound dampeners in several students' protective suits. But what made the sound truly terrifying wasn't just its volume or intensity, it was the raw, primal fury behind it. The sound of a creature that had evolved to be the undisputed master of its domain. The containment field had been flickering for the past few seconds, throwing unstable light patterns across the room. Dr. Velthor had noticed the fluctuations but assumed they were normal power variations. Now, as she watched in horror, the energy barrier that had been holding back nearly 700 kilograms of pure predator simply winked out of existence. The bear, which had been pacing restlessly in its enclosure, suddenly found itself with nothing between it and a room full of potential prey. Emergency sirens immediately began wailing throughout the building. Red warning lights bathed the classroom in an eerie glow as the Institute's automated systems detected the containment breach. The computer's voice, artificially calm despite the crisis, began repeating evacuation procedures in 17 different languages, but the words were barely audible over the chaos that erupted in the classroom. The Etherean students, being made of pure energy, could move faster than most solid beings. They immediately began flowing toward the exits like glowing streams of light, their panic causing them to leave brilliant trails in the air. The crystalline Vorthams were trying to move quickly despite their fragile nature, their bodies chiming like broken glass with each hurried step. The Nebulons, constrained by their bulky atmospheric suits, were struggling to navigate between desks and chairs that hadn't been designed for their unique bod. Y-shapes. Dr. Velthor's training kicked in as she reached for her emergency communicator. Her 6 hands moved with practiced efficiency, activating distress signals, sealing blast doors, and calling for the security teams. But even as she worked, part of her mind was calculating the odds. The nearest security force was at least 4 minutes away. The exits were on the opposite side of the room from where the bear had been contained. The creature was already moving, its massive form surprisingly quick for something so large. Remain calm and proceed to the nearest exit in an orderly fashion, She broadcast through her suit's external speakers, though she could hear her own voice cracking with barely controlled panic. Do not run. Do not make sudden movements. Emergency protocols are now in effect. Even as she spoke, she knew her words were useless. The students were already running, their various survival instincts overriding any classroom training. The bear, meanwhile, had risen to its full height on its hind legs, standing upright. It was nearly 4 meters tall, its massive paws equipped with claws that could tear through most known materials. Its small, dark eyes were scanning the room, taking in the chaos and movement with the calculated intelligence of a predator that had evolved to hunt in some of the most dangerous environments in the G. Alaxi, that's when Dr. Velthara saw something that made her forget about emergency procedures entirely. Instead of joining the desperate rush toward the exits, Jehoiakim was standing up from his desk. Not quickly, not with the jerky panic movements of the other students, but with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who was completely in control of the situation. He stretched his arms above his head, rolling his shoulders like someone who had been sitting too long and was working out a few kicks. The gesture was so casual, so completely at odds with the life and death situation unfolding round him, that Dr. Velthara found herself staring in disbelief. The human was acting like he was getting up from a boring lecture, not facing down a creature that could kill him in seconds. Then, to her absolute horror, Jeho began walking toward the bear. Not away from it, like every sane being in the room was doing, not toward the exits, like basic survival instinct demanded. He was walking directly toward the massive predator, his hands empty, his posture relaxed, his expression almost curious. The bear had identified the main exit by now and was moving in that direction, cutting off the escape route for several of the slower students. Jeho, no. Dr. Velthara screamed through her suit's speakers, her voice amplified to maximum volume. Get back. That creature could tear apart a military combat mech. It's classified as a Class 9 threat. The human paused and looked back at her with that same smile that had made her so nervous earlier. Up close, she could see that his eyes were completely calm, without a trace of the fear that should have been driving him toward the nearest exit. When he spoke, his voice was conversational. Almost amused. Yeah, Professor, I know it could tear apart a combat mech, he said, pulling off his jacket and draping it over a nearby chair. But here's the thing, I'm not a combat mech. I'm something much worse. I'm a human who's late for lunch. Before Dr. Velthara could process what that meant, Jeho began making sounds that sent ice-cold terror through every alien in the room. They weren't words in any language the universal translators could recognize. They were deep, guttural noises that seemed to come from somewhere primal and ancient. Grunts, huffs, and low rumbling sounds that made the hair on the back of every organic being's neck stand up. The sounds were clearly some form of communication. But they didn't sound like any human language Dr. Velthara had studied. They sounded like the vocalizations of a predator, the kind of sounds that creatures made when they were establishing territory or challenging rivals. The alien students who were still in the room froze completely, their flight responses overwhelmed by the recognition that they might be witnessing something far beyond their understanding. The bear, which had been focused on the exits and the fleeing students, suddenly stopped moving. Its massive head turned toward Jeho, and for the first time since the containment field had failed, the creature looked uncertain, its ears, small compared to its enormous skull, swiveled forward as it tried to process the sounds the human was making. The silence that fell over the classroom was more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. The emergency alarms were still wailing in the distance, but inside the room, the only sounds were the soft mechanical whirring of the air recycling systems and the rapid, Panicked breathing of the alien students who remained frozen in place. Even the most basic sounds seemed amplified in the tense atmosphere. The slight creak of furniture, the barely audible hum of electronic equipment. The whisper of air through the ventilation systems. Geo continued making those strange sounds. But Dr. Velthara was beginning to realize they weren't random at all. There was a pattern to them, a rhythm and structure that suggested genuine communication. The human's voice would rise and fall in specific ways, alternating between deep, rumbling tones and softer, more nuanced sounds. His posture remained relaxed, but there was something deliberate about every movement he made, every sound he produced. What made the situation even more surreal was that Jiho was maintaining direct eye contact with the bear throughout his strange performance. In most species, direct eye contact with a predator was either a sign of challenge or prey behavior, both potentially fatal mistakes. Yet the human seemed completely comfortable staring into the dark, intelligent eyes of a creature that could kill him with a single swipe of its massive paw. Dr. Velthara's protective suit was equipped with the most advanced sensor systems money could buy. These sensors were designed to monitor everything from atmospheric conditions to threat levels to biological stress indicators. Right now, every single one of them was flashing warnings of imminent catastrophe. The suit's artificial intelligence was calculating probability matrices and consistently arriving at the same conclusion. The human was about to be torn apart by an apex predator, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. But what the sensors were actually detecting contradicted everything they had been programmed to expect. Instead of attacking the human, the Kodiak bear was doing something that should have been impossible according to every piece of scientific literature on Terran predators. It was backing away. The movement was subtle at first, the bear's massive head pulled back slightly, its ears flattening against its skull in what any xenobiologist would recognize as defensive posturing. Its weight shifted from its front paws to its rear legs, creating more distance between itself and the approaching human. These were not the movements of a predator preparing to attack. These were the movements of an animal that was, incredibly, showing signs of submission. Dr. Velthara had spent decades studying predator behavior from across the galaxy. She had documented the hunting patterns of Rigelian death cats, analyzed the pack dynamics of Centauri shadow wolves, and written extensively on the territorial displays of Betelgeuse acid serpents. Never, in all her research, had she encountered a single documented case of an apex predator displaying submission behaviors toward a member of a different species. It simply didn't happen. Apex predators, by definition, were at the top of their food chains. They didn't submit to anything. Yet here was a 700-kilogram Kodiak bear, one of Terra's most feared predators, acting like a subordinate animal in the presence of a human who weighed perhaps a tenth of what it did. The bear's entire body language was changing, its aggressive posture melting away into something that looked almost respectful. Jiho's vocalizations were becoming more complex as he continued his slow approach. What had started as simple grunts and huffs was evolving into something that sounded like a genuine conversation. The human would make a series of sounds, then pause as if waiting for a response. The bear, incredibly, would sometimes make soft huffing noises in return, as if it were actually participating in the exchange. "This is impossible," whispered Jory, a Vorthan student whose crystalline body was pulsing with rapid, terror-induced light frequencies. Her voice was barely audible, transmitted through her suit's internal communication system so as not to disturb whatever was happening between the human and the bear. The Deathworlder is actually communicating with the apex predator. This violates every principle of xenobiology we've ever established. Other students were beginning to emerge from their hiding places behind overturned desks and equipment. Drawn by a mixture of scientific curiosity and sheer disbelief, the Etherian students, still maintaining their protective energy barriers, were pulsing with colors that indicated extreme confusion. The Nebulans were adjusting their atmospheric suit's sensors to maximum sensitivity, trying to record every detail of what they were witnessing. Dr. Velthara found herself caught between her scientific training and her survival instincts. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to evacuate the room, to get as far away as possible from the uncontained predator. But her curiosity as a xenobiologist was overwhelming. She was witnessing something that could revolutionize their understanding of interspecies communication, something that challenged the very foundations of what they thought they knew about predator behavior. Jiho was now within 3 meters of the bear, close enough that the creature could easily reach him with a single lunge. Instead of attacking, the bear was continuing to back away, its massive head lowered in what could only be described as a respectful posture. The human raised one hand, palm upward, in a gesture that seemed to carry meaning beyond what any of the aliens could understand. The effect was immediate and stunning. The 700-kilogram predator, capable of crushing military-grade armor with its jaws, sat down like an obedient house pet. Its massive haunches settled onto the floor with surprising grace, and it tilted its head slightly as if waiting for further instructions. Dr. Velthara, Diho said casually, not even bothering to look away from the bear. You might want to have your maintenance team check the power coupling on your containment fields. Kodiak bears generate bioelectrical fields that can interfere with standard containment systems. They're classified as Class 9 minimum threat level, not Class 7 like your system was calibrated for. Pretty basic oversight. Really, the bear, as if responding to some unspoken cue, let out a massive yawn that revealed teeth longer than most beings' fingers, each one capable of puncturing starship hull plating. Then, in a display that left every alien in the room speechless, it lay down on the floor, rested its enormous head on its paws, and closed its eyes as if settling in for a peaceful nap. Dr. Velthara's protective suit registered her elevated stress levels as dangerous, automatically administering mild sedatives through the internal medical system. But no amount of chemical intervention could calm the storm of confusion and disbelief raging through her mind. Her 6 hands trembled uncontrollably as she took hesitant steps toward the most impossible scene she had ever witnessed in her decades of scientific research. Jiho had settled himself on the classroom floor in a relaxed sitting position, his legs crossed beneath him as if he were meditating in a peaceful garden rather than sitting inches away from one of the galaxy's most feared predators. The Kodiak bear, which moments ago had been a terrifying force of nature capable of tearing through reinforced steel, was now lying on its side like an enormous, contented house pet. Its massive chest rose and fell with the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep, and occasionally it would make soft huffing sounds that almost resembled snoring. Through the transparent aluminum walls that separated the classroom from the corridor, Dr. Velthara could see the security response team that had arrived. A dozen heavily armed guards in full combat armor were positioned with their weapons trained on the scene, their fingers hovering over triggers that could unleash enough firepower to level a small building. Their commanding officer was speaking rapidly into his communication device, no doubt trying to get guidance from higher authorities about how to handle a situation that had never occurred before in the Institute's history. The security team's weapons were specifically designed to handle escaped specimens from Deathworlds, plasma rifles that could vaporize organic matter, sonic disruptors calibrated to disrupt the nervous systems of various alien physiologies, and containment nets made from materials stronger than starship hulls. Yet all of that military hardware seemed completely irrelevant now, rendered useless by the simple fact that there was no longer any threat to contain. Dr. Velthara's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. transmitted through her suit's external speakers. How? The single word carried the weight of her entire worldview crumbling round her. How is this possible? Every computer model, every simulation, every piece of data we have about predator behavior says this scenario is impossible. You're both apex predators from the same death world. According to everything we know about evolutionary biology, you should be fighting to the death right now. Jiho looked up at her with those unsettling human eyes, and she noticed that his expression had changed. The casual confidence was still there, but there was something else now. A gentleness that seemed completely at odds with everything she thought she knew about Deathworlders. Without breaking eye contact with her, he reached out and gently scratched behind the bear's ear, the same way she had seen beings interact with domesticated companion animals. The effect was immediate and startling. The massive predator made a sound deep in its throat that could only be described as contentment, a rumbling purr that vibrated through the floor. It was the kind of sound that companion animals made when they were completely relaxed and happy. Not the kind of noise anyone expected from a creature capable of crushing bones with its jaw. That's the thing about death worlds, Professor, Jiho said, his voice carrying a warmth that she hadn't expected. Most beings from safer planets think we survive by being the deadliest things round, by outfighting and outkilling everything else. But that's not how it works. We don't survive by being the most violent. We survive by being smart enough to know when not to fight. He continued his gentle scratching, and the bear shifted slightly to give him better access to the spot. Behind its ear, the gesture was so natural, so comfortable, that it looked like something they had done together many times before, despite the fact that they had never met until today. This big guy isn't my enemy. Jiho continued, his voice taking on an almost affectionate tone as he looked at the sleeping bear. He's just scared, confused, and probably hungry. He woke up in a strange place, surrounded by creatures he'd never seen before, with no idea how he got there or what was expected of him, same as any of us would be in his situation. Across the room, Minju, one of the Etherean students who had been hiding behind an overturned desk, began making a soft keening sound that her species produced when experiencing deep philosophical distress. Her energy form was pulsing with colors that indicated profound emotional turmoil as she processed what she was witnessing. "We've been studying Deathworlders completely wrong," she said. Her voice transmitted through the universal translator, with harmonics that conveyed her distress. All this time, we thought they were monsters who managed to survive in hell by becoming worse monsters than anything else there. But they're not monsters at all. They're beings who learned to find compassion and empathy even in the most hostile environments imaginable. Jiho's expression softened even further as he heard her words. He looked round the classroom at the various alien students who were slowly emerging from their hiding places, their curiosity beginning to overcome their fear. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room stop and listen. "You want to know what the scariest thing about humans really is?" he asked, his hand still gently stroking the bear's fur. "It's not that we can kill almost anything if we have to. It's not our teeth or our claws or our ability to survive in environments that would kill most other species. The scariest thing about humans is that we can choose not to kill." He paused, letting those words sink in before continuing. "Every single day, every human on Earth makes the conscious choice to be kind instead of cruel, to help instead of harm, to build instead of destroy. We have the capacity for incredible violence, yes, but we also have the wisdom to know that violence should always be the last option, not the first one." The bear stirred slightly in its sleep, making another contented sound as Jiho's gentle ministrations continued. That's what makes us truly dangerous in the galaxy," he said with a smile that no longer seemed threatening to the watching aliens. "Not our teeth or our strength, but our ability to decide what we do with the power we have. Anyone can destroy. It takes real strength to choose to protect and nurture instead." In the 3 weeks following what would forever be known as the Deathworlder incident, the Galactic Xenobiology Institute had transformed from a quiet academic institution into the center of the most heated scientific debate in over 2 centuries. The security footage of Jehoiakim calmly approaching and communicating with an uncontained Kodiak bear had been requested by every major university, research facility, and government institution across 17 different star systems. The video had been analyzed frame by frame, with experts from dozens of species offering theories that ranged from telepathic abilities to pheromone manipulation to some form of advanced technology that the human had somehow concealed. Students crowded into lecture halls to watch the footage, debating endlessly about what they had witnessed. The more the video was studied, the more questions it raised, because every analysis came to the same impossible conclusion. Geo had accomplished something that violated the fundamental laws of predator behavior as they were understood throughout the galaxy. But while organic beings debated and theorized in conference rooms and classrooms across known space, something far more significant was happening in the quantum processing cores deep beneath the Institute. Aria 7, the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created by the joint efforts of 12 different civilizations, had been tasked with conducting a comprehensive analysis of the incident. What had begun as a routine threat assessment had evolved into something that would challenge the very foundations of how artificial intelligence understood organic life. Aria 7 possessed processing power that dwarfed entire planetary computer networks. Its quantum neural matrices could analyze millions of variables simultaneously, cross-reference data from thousands of sources, and run complex simulations that would take organic minds centuries to complete for 847 consecutive processing cycles. The AI had focused every aspect of its considerable intellect on understanding what had happened in that classroom. The initial analysis had been straightforward enough. Human approaches dangerous predator. Human makes specific vocalizations. Predator displays submission behaviors. Situation resolves peacefully. But as Aria 7 dug deeper into the data, examining micro-expressions, vocal stress patterns, biometric readings, and behavioral indicators, it began to uncover layers of complexity that had been invisible to organic observers. What Jiho had done wasn't just communication in the traditional sense. He had demonstrated something that Aria 7's databases had no previous record of: the ability to project emotional intelligence across species barriers under extreme stress conditions. The human had somehow assessed the bear's emotional state, recognized its confusion and fear, and responded with exactly the right combination of dominance displays and reassurance signals to transform a potential predator into a calm, cooperative entity. Fascinating, our A7 murmured to itself through the Institute's internal communication networks, its voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep analytical satisfaction. The AI had developed the habit of vocalizing its thoughts, a quirk that its programmers had never quite understood but had decided was harmless enough to allow. The Deathworlder species achieves apex predator status not through superior physical capabilities or more efficient violence, but through superior emotional intelligence. They have, in effect, weaponized compassion. This revelation had prompted Aria 7 to expand its analysis beyond the immediate incident. Using its access to the galactic information networks, the AI began cross-referencing every piece of available data about human behavior, history, and development. What it discovered was staggering in its implications. Humans had not conquered Terra through superior firepower or more efficient killing abilities. They had succeeded by becoming the most efficient cooperators the galaxy had ever seen. Where other species had survived through specialization developing harder shells, sharper claws, more potent venom, humans had survived by learning to work together, not just with other humans, but with completely different species. The data showed that humans had domesticated hundreds of other Terran species, forming symbiotic relationships that benefited both parties. They had learned to communicate with creatures as different from themselves as the Kodiak bears, establishing pack bonds with wolves, training relationships with birds of prey, and even cooperative partnerships with insects. No other known species had demonstrated anything approaching this level of cross-species social intelligence. More intriguingly, the humans had accomplished all of this without losing their own predatory capabilities. They remained dangerous when necessary, but they had developed the wisdom to know when violence was the appropriate response and when cooperation would be more effective. This combination of lethal capability and emotional intelligence was unprecedented in Aria 7's vast databases. The AI's processing race hummed with increased activity as it began to understand the true implications of its discovery through the Institute's communication systems. RA7 announced its findings to the being who had become its primary point of contact in the weeks since the incident. Dr. Velthara. The AI's voice resonated through the laboratory speakers with a clarity that made the professor look up from the research notes. I believe we have severely underestimated the human threat assessment level, Dr. Velthara set down her data pad and looked toward the nearest speaker with confusion. In the weeks since the incident, she had grown accustomed to Aria 7's analytical reports, but something in the AI's tone suggested this was different. Threat assessment, she asked Aria 7. Jiho saved everyone in that classroom. His actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. How could that possibly be considered threatening? The AI paused for several processing cycles before responding, and when it did, there was something in its voice that Dr. Velthara had never heard before, something that almost sounded like awe. Because, Professor, any species capable of turning apex predators into allies through pure emotional intelligence is capable of turning anyone into an ally. Humans don't conquer through fear or intimidation. They don't rule through superior force or advanced technology. They conquer through friendship, through empathy, through their ability to understand and connect with other beings on a fundamental emotional level. Aria 7's voice took on additional harmonics as its processing power increased to accommodate the complexity of its analysis. Consider the implications, Dr. Velthara. In every first contact scenario, in every diplomatic situation, in every conflict resolution attempt, humans possess an inherent advantage that we never recognized. They can form genuine emotional connections with species they've never encountered before, turning potential enemies into friends, potential conflicts into collaborations. The professor sank into her chair as the weight of Aria 7's words began to sink in. You're saying that human emotional intelligence is a form of soft power. More than that, Aria 7 responded. I believe it may be the most powerful force in the galaxy. Military might can be countered with better weapons. Economic power can be undermined by resource control. Technological advantages can be overcome through research and development. But how do you defend against a species that can make you genuinely want to be their friend? The AI's processing race reached peak efficiency as it began to formulate its final conclusions. Professor, I have a recommendation for the Galactic Council. We should not be studying humans to understand how to defeat them or contain them. We should be studying them to understand how to become more like them. Their approach to interspecies relations could revolutionize galactic civilization.